So, welcome to our live show tonight. I have with me Jim Daniel again. And tonight we're going to talk about Victoria in British Columbia. I think you're going to enjoy it. He has a lot of information, a lot of things we're going to talk about. If we're meeting for the first time, my name's Ken Edmonds, and on this channel I help people that travel with difficulties travel better, enjoy their trips more, and then I share information useful for their friends and families as well. If you have any comments, please put them in the chat. Do me a favor, also let me know where you're watching from. We will be doing some questions and answers at the end of the show. So if you have a question, post it. We won't get to it right away, but like I said, at the end of the show, we'll go through all of the questions. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Jim, and your experiences in Victoria, and we'll get started.
Well, we started back in 1971. My wife and I went up there, and I'm not sure how we decided that was where we were going, but we hadn't been able to get away right after we were married, so we went up there 8-9 months later in the wintertime. And it was kind of unusual because in those days, no one traveled to Canada in the winter. 1971, we got on the ferry in Washington State and traveled over and got there and had to wake up the Mountie to let us into the country. It was kind of, who are you and what do you want? Why are you coming now? But we had a great time. We really did. It was warm and welcoming, and we really loved it. I kind of thought I should talk about how to get there because everyone knows, yes, you can fly in. They have an airport. You can fly from Seattle on a seaplane and land that way right in the harbor. But it's a lot more interesting and a lot more enjoyable, especially if you're a cruiser, to take a ferry. And the BC ferries travel from Vancouver. You could catch it by getting to Vancouver Airport and go back downtown to catch the BC ferry bus. So you take a bus to the ferry, ride across on the ferry, get back on the bus, and it takes you from the point where they dock into downtown Victoria. Or you can get to Victoria from Washington State, up in the northern Washington State, Anacortes, Washington. They have a ferry that goes directly over to Sydney, British Columbia, which happens to be right where the Mikaze Gardens is. From Seattle, there's a high-speed ferry called the Victoria Clipper, and it's pretty easy jet boat kind of experience, catamaran haul, and it's much like being on an aircraft, except it's much, much wider and multiple decks. But that's pretty nice. Our last trip to Victoria was a few months after a cruise. We had taken the cruise. Of course, the cruise ships don't stop very long in Victoria, and we didn't have our fill of it. So from here, we drove up to Port Angeles, Washington, which is a great little town, explored around the westernmost point of continental U.S. in Washington State, in the great forests up there, and then took the Blackball ferry from Port Angeles into the harbor at Victoria. And that was a very nice ride, a couple hours, pretty easy. Put our car on, and since we were going to be there 3 days, it was more cost effective just to take our car over than to ride over and rent a car. Once you get there, once you're in Victoria, getting around is pretty easy. There are a lot of rental car companies. I've never had a problem finding one, but it might be fun if it's summertime. There is a company there, Victoria Cycle, it's called Cycle BC, that rents bicycles, motor scooters, and motorcycles, which might be a good experience if you're licensed to drive that sort of thing and experienced on a motorcycle.
Okay.
That's getting there.
I would tell you my story. I rented a moped once, and I totaled it, and so I've been a little bit leery of scooters and mopeds since then. And it didn't have anything to do with them. It was all about me. Um, so again, welcome to everybody that's watching. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do me a favor, hit the like and the subscribe buttons so that I know you're there. Also, if you hit the like button, I'll know you can hear me okay. So after you're on the island and we've worked out our transportation, what would you suggest for our next stop?
Well, the big point everyone seems to go to Victoria for is the Bouchard Gardens. And it's about an 80-acre, I don't want to call it a formal garden, I'd call it more of an exposition garden. It was built in a limestone quarry. As they ran out of limestone, the wife of the quarry owner said, well, how about if I put a couple of plants in? And he says, oh, a couple of plants, who cares? And it's turned into a world destination. It's absolutely amazing. Most people don't see more than about 10% of it. It goes on forever. It's open year round. I think they're closed this day and maybe one or two other days. But they light it in the evenings. It's absolutely gorgeous. And it doesn't ever seem to have any down season. You know, if you look out in my yard, it's really nice right now in the summer, but in the wintertime, it's kind of sparse. Well, they don't seem to do that up there. So that's a big point. Once you're over there, there's the little town of Sydney, British Columbia. And that's a nice little town, very welcoming, and a couple of great pubs there to go for lunch or dinner or whatever. But when you're in Victoria, one of the things that Canadians will tell you about Victoria is they are more British than the British. Okay. So high tea is everywhere. Afternoon tea is a snack. High tea is a light meal to carry you through until supper, which is 8 or 9 at night. And you can find tea everywhere. The Empress Hotel is one of those great old hotels. It's now owned by the Fairmont Group, so it's quite a nice place. Upscale hotel. We stayed there for a couple of days one time. I think that was our about 1989 trip. And it was a very nice, very high-end hotel. But there are a ton of other places you can stay. They serve a high tea there that I guess is not to be forgotten. I've forgotten it, but my wife probably hasn't. She loves that sort of thing. While you're in that Downtown Harbour area now, the Empress Hotel overlooks the harbor. Right there across from it is the Royal British Columbia Museum and Archives. It's a museum of natural history and a museum of history of British Columbia. That in itself, for me, is worth at least a day, maybe 2 or 3. You can go on the harbor ferry tour. Those are some small little ferry boats that are just people ferries and kind of neat. You can do some whale watching and that sort of thing from the harbor. There's a butterfly gardens there. But adjacent to the Royal Museum is the British Columbia Parliament, and they have tours. This is the seat of government for British Columbia, and it looks every bit the British Parliament buildings, and they still have that air about them that they really are British, not necessarily Canadian, and certainly not American. They are different.
So they're firm believers in that British, in the British Columbia name then.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Couple of castles in town that are really worth your time. There's Craigdark Castle, and they used to have a tour just of the castle, and you could see the building and that sort of thing. Now they've expanded that to where they have more of a living history kind of a feeling, where you can go in and get the feel of what it would have been like to live in that castle. and people in costumes and that sort of thing. There's also Hallie Castle, and that's pretty easy to access also. All of this stuff is easy to access either on Uber or taxi. By the way, in Canada, if you hop in a taxi and you only have American money, keep it in your pocket, pull out your credit card or your debit card and hand that to the driver. He'll hand you back the little machine with the card in it, and you punch in the amount of the tip. Maybe you sign with a little pen, maybe you put in your PIN number, and you can do it that way much more easily. You don't have to worry about the conversion, and you don't lose that 25% on the money, because their dollar is 75 US cents to $1 Canadian typically.
Yeah. I think that's typical in a lot of countries where the is this kind of like we took a trip into Mexico, and everything was 2,000 pesos, which was at that time was the equivalent of $1. So a small bottle of soda, on the train, they wanted $1 for it. We found out you get off and you could get like 4 for $1 if you got off and went to the local store. So it was a local train that made lots of stops, so we got off, and that's another story. So I noticed you listed several places for tea. And by the way, for anybody that's interested, in the comments, both on Facebook and on YouTube, you should find all the show notes and the links to all the different locations that we're talking about. We tried to do that to make it easy for you to do a little research on your own. But anyway, you listed several other places for afternoon tea or high tea.
Again, this is a British tradition. Get together and sit down and have tea and visit and take your time, take a breath, relax. I grew up in a Swedish town, and they have a term fika, F-I-K-A, and we're going to go fika. That means you're going to sit down and drink some coffee and maybe have a little biscuit or something, but you're going to take your time and relax. And that's where this afternoon tea and high tea comes in. Mikaze Gardens is a more of a formal garden. They have all sorts of things there, such as weddings and receptions and those sorts of things that go on there. They have an afternoon tea. I believe they also have high tea later in the day. There's Pendray Inn and Tea House, which is very, very nice place, and a little less formal maybe. It's called Carry Mews, C-A-R-Y-M-E-W-S Tea House, and that's one of those things to do. But just getting in a car, or if you're going to rent a scooter or something and drive around, just drive around the perimeter of the city. You'll see some amazing sights. You can drive and drive and drive and drive, and never seems to end. We spent most of a day on our last trip just driving from the harbor around past the ferry dock, or past the cruise ship dock. And as you pass those, you go on into a residential area, and quite nice homes with views of the ocean, and drive on around quite an assortment of homes, quite an assortment of views, and different places really worth seeing. Just driving around the area is wonderful. Another thing you can do is go up island. If you go west slightly from Victoria and go up Highway 1, that'll take you up to Nanaimo. If you have an extra day, you can go as far north as Campbell River. That's an all-day drive just to get there and an all-day drive back. But up there are a lot of little resorts and lodges and things like that. We went up there and went salmon fishing. And my son was about 9 at the time, so boundless energy. We caught salmon until he was tired of catching salmon. And it was quite a day. We rented a little boat and challenged my boating skills, but had a great time. And for a 9-year-old to catch a bunch of fish and bring them back, and then we shipped a bunch back, it was really quite an adventure for him. And then talking about them later when we were eating them. But there's a lot to do. If you go around, there's a website for Victoria Trails, and you'll find Niagara Falls in Vancouver Island, Victoria. It, again, is just north of Vancouver off of Highway 1. And it's Victoria Trails, the Goldstream Park, it's called. Quite a lot of hiking and outdoor adventure. The Canadians are very much outdoor-oriented people, and you'll find a lot of things going on for outdoor adventures and outdoor experiences, that sort of thing.
Okay, that sounds like a pretty amazing place to visit. So if you were going to make a trip up there, and sorry to get us off script here, but if you're going to make a trip up there and you wanted, let's say I live on the East Coast, if I was going to come and just to go to Victoria, is there enough to keep you busy for a week there, or is it a 2 or 3 day place? Or mind you, I wouldn't mind catching a salmon or two.
Yeah, going north along the channel, on the east side of the island is pretty large, and going north there to one of the towns, I particularly happen to find Campbell River interesting. Go up there and spend a few days somewhere and go salmon fishing. You can get guided charters. You can rent a boat, and rent tackle and that sort of thing. That could be 3 days, 4 days right there. And there are people there that'll process your fish and freeze it and ship it back. You can go out to the West Coast. One of the things we did is we went to the town of Port Alberni, and it's the town that stinks. It was a paper mill town, and in those days the controls weren't so good, and the whole town smelled like paper mill, which wasn't very pleasant. We caught the mail boat that took mail out to the coast. And it went to a couple little fishing villages right on the west coast of Vancouver Island. We went to the town of Ucluelet, Uculet, Ucluelet. And there's nothing there. There's a little store. You can buy a soda and probably a pre-made sandwich or something, and that's about it. But it was a great trip out. We saw a lot of interesting stuff. They happened to have a naturalist on board who was showing us where they had clear-cut mountainsides and then replanted, and you had to have him point it out or you'd never see that mountainside had been clear-cut. Gorgeous scenery. Travels out on a river and brings you back. On the way back, we stopped at a salmon farm and brought back great big containers of live salmon going to the cannery. So there are a lot of things to do. I put in a link to tourismvictoria.com, and there's probably a month's worth of activities there. One of the little side trips we made was we found Victoria has a Chinatown, but the parking in downtown Victoria is pretty awful, and we looked around. So I found another spot because we happen to like dim sum. That's the Hong Kong lunch food, little nibbly bites of this and that and something else. And we found a little restaurant in the perfect location. It's called Jade Fountain, and I really had to look for it. They have a sign, and they have a doorway which is behind the liquor store, around the corner from the only place you can park. And then you go in that door and go downstairs and find it. It's really hidden away. It actually resides in the basement of the Red Lion Hotel, but they don't advertise it as such. They just give you a street address. Probably as authentic as any dim sum I've had, and being an aficionado, I've been to the better places in San Francisco and around Northern California and Seattle. One of the great spots for dim sum. And again, to plug this little tiny restaurant, they probably have 20 tables, but on the weekends they bring the carts around. So they're bringing a cart with about 10 or 15 different items on it, a lot of each one. You kind of point at what you think looks good, and that's what they give you, and they mark your ticket and you pay for it at the end. But
okay.
Dim sum has a kind of a shady reputation. There used to be a Chinese slang word for it, and I don't remember the word, but what it translated to was greasy pocket. And the reason they called it that is they would count the plates at the end of your meal. And so if you wanted to kind of cut down on the bill, you'd take one of those plates and slip it in your pocket, but then your pocket would be greasy.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, I've been fortunate. I've never had a greasy pocket, I guess. Okay, well, you make it sound really, really interesting. I was supposed to go to Vancouver for a while this summer for a cruise conference, and then that didn't work out. It's like everything else; it's been canceled due to the virus.
Yeah.
But they'll have it. I'm sure they'll have it again there next year, and so maybe we'll do that. Spend some time in Vancouver and then go up and spend some time in Victoria. You made it sound very interesting.
Yeah. I think that the BC ferries and the Black Ball ferry will be opening up much sooner than the cruise ships. So you'll be able to drive to Vancouver or fly to Vancouver. You'll be able to fly into Victoria or take one of the boats in. Being oriented toward cruising, the ferries always intrigue me also. And
I think the ferries would be a lot of fun. And I think you never know what you'll see when you're out at sea a little ways.
That's right. And it's the same with being on a cruise ship. I know a lot of people spend a lot of money on having this big fancy stateroom and a balcony and the greatest view off the ship. This is a better view than 5129 is a far better view than 5133 and those kind of things. No. When I'm on the cruise ship, I want to get out and circulate with the other passengers and meet other people and see other things. And sitting in my cabin with the same people I'm in with here when I'm at home does not intrigue me. But getting out and circulating does.
And I think there's a lot to be said for it. I always enjoy the people I meet and run into on the ship. We've made some nice acquaintances that way. I'm a fan of just getting out on the deck too, because I don't think there's a right side or a wrong side as far as where your cabin is, but there's no guarantee that even if you're on the best side, that something's not happening on the other side. And if you're on deck, you can walk around and see what's going on. I did do we had a balcony when we went to sailed southbound from Seward, just because I got one basically for free. Yeah. And we spent a little bit of time on the balcony. What I did do though is I strapped my GoPro clone to the railing and just let it film for hours. And so I have lots of video of the inside passage, and that is just such an amazing trip.
That does sound good. For me, if it were just my decision, I'd have an inside cabin because I want to go in and sleep. I want to take a shower and change clothes and get out.
Yeah. When we went to Alaska the first time, we did an inside cabin, and we had booked an inside cabin on the Jewel because I like to save my money for on shore. There's so many things to do on those cruises.
Yeah, and the whole thing on the ferry also is visiting with people and talking with people. Years ago, I used to ride the Oakland Alameda ferry to San Francisco every day for work. And the alternative was riding Bay Area Rapid Transit, which is the underground tube under the bay. And it's funny, if you talk to people on BART, you're a strange person. If you don't talk to people on the ferry, you're a strange person, because everybody talks to everybody. Very social place. And I think the cruises and the ferries are that way.
I think it's interesting too, because I'm a huge Amtrak fan. Actually, I'm a huge railroad fan. My grandfather was an engineer on the Santa Fe when it was steam engines. I had an uncle that was an engineer on the Santa Fe and then an engineer for Amtrak. And I love traveling, but the train is that way. It's social. You talk to people because you're going to be with those people for the next 24, 36 hours. You might as well go ahead and have a conversation.
So here's the big question. Everybody asks, what excursion should we take in Victoria? And having been there enough times and done the cruise where they have a short stop in Victoria because they're required to, I absolutely like the city and garden tour. You cannot do that on your own. You cannot rent a car and go, because the gardens that time of year closes early and you won't be able to get in if you get there. It's quite a long drive out there, easy to get turned around, but the tour takes you right there. It takes you through Victoria downtown, gives you a lot of history, a lot of information about Victoria. Take that tour, take that excursion. All the other excursions, they're nice. I don't think there's anything wrong, but the big tourist attraction of Victoria is the gardens. Go see that at least once. If you're going to go back, maybe we have gone downtown and just sit at a outdoor pub and sit at the outdoor seating and have a nice little nibble in the evening or something like that, and some cider or wine or beer or something. But if you have to make that decision of just one thing to do, because you only have time to do one thing while you're in Victoria Port, take the city and garden tour.
Okay, I will keep that in mind, because the last time I don't even think we got off in Victoria. But again, we got in, like 5:30 or 6 o'clock, and we were there till 10. So it was like, it seemed like kind of a wait. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I typically don't book through the ship, because I'm a firm believer I'd much rather the money stay in the town that I'm spending the money in, rather than half of it going back to the corporate world.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have a question here. And so I'll see if maybe you know an answer to this. Debbie Davis asked, is this the city with the Cupcake Sisters? You know the answer to that? I couldn't.
I do not. Cupcake Sisters.
Okay.
Ring a bell to me.
Okay, Debbie, I didn't find a quick answer on it, and I am sorry for that. We try to find answers. That's just a hard question, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, listen, Jim, I really appreciate you being with us. Again, we'll look forward to having you on again. For those that are watching, again, if you haven't subscribed on YouTube, please do so. Or if you're on Facebook, please follow me. I do appreciate the likes that we've gotten. Just so everybody knows, the next in the Alaska tour planning or trip planning series is going to be the combined ports of Haines and Skagway. That should be out this week, so you'll want to check on YouTube for that. Again, thank you very much. Appreciate everybody being here, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.